ready to go, sir.
Hello, everyone, and greetings. I'm Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, and I really am delighted to share my thoughts with you all on the National Education Policy, which after all is an integral policy framework that will guide the future of education in our country, or is at least meant to, at this NEP 2021 conclave organized by Clymbe. My congratulations to Rachna and Prajakta for initiating this venture, which is both focused on education and skill development and on providing career opportunities to young people in our country. I'm afraid that due to a parliamentary commitment, it will not be possible for me to join you live, but I'm delighted to note in these pre-recorded remarks that the conference has brought together 550 registrants, and that as a result, you have a very, very good turnout today, 30% being students, 25% teachers, and 22% principals, as well as 17% parents, who of course are very often key in guiding their children in the right direction. I'm also pleased to know that amongst the remaining participants, there are NGO representatives, policy professionals, and career counselors. And all of you must have your own perspective and views on the National Education Policy. When the policy was first announced last summer, I came out with my own thoughts in some more detail, and time doesn't permit me to repeat all of that, but you can certainly hear my views on YouTube and elsewhere. But very briefly, let me say that I welcome the policy in the sense that it's important that the government has actually thought things through on the education front. It will certainly go on to play an important role in how India learns and educates the next generation. My principal concern was that we do have a parliamentary system, and a policy of this nature should first have been brought to Parliament and discussed there before being adopted and announced. But in my own view, of course, it has not been, shall we say, bluntly, given the privilege of being considered by the principal deliberative body under our Constitution, our Parliament. And that is something which I remain concerned about, and I hope that in the forthcoming budget session of Parliament, there will be an opportunity to discuss the new education policy, and I certainly hope to speak in greater detail there. So just to give you a very quick summary of sort of my headline reactions, what are the good things about it? I like very much the move away from a rigid, regulated educational approach in our country, which has been the hallmark of education for too long, into much greater flexibility, particularly when it comes to streaming, for example, that you can in high school take a course in physics and one in history at the same time, and the same in college. This, I think, is a very, very welcome development. It has been possible in Western countries. It has not been possible in India, where you had to choose between science and humanities, or science, humanities, and commerce in most school institutions. I'm also pleased at the concerns that the previous draft, which was first unleashed back in 2019, had elicited about the risks of Hindi imposition, have been backed away from, and the three-language formula has been endorsed. That there is a serious attempt to focus on what one might call the academia-industry interface. And this has been a big issue for me. When I was minister, we tried very hard to push employability as a major criterion. There was a catechism in the Human Resource Development Ministry, as it was then called, of equity, expansion, and excellence. And I thought those were very good things. But as minister, I added a fourth E, and that was employability, because I was extremely concerned about the fact that we were producing a larger academic system, a university system. More graduates were emerging, but at the end of the day, not very many of them were found by employers to be adequately employable or to be sufficiently qualified. And that was something I felt we really needed to address. And one of the reforms we brought in during my time as a minister was that you cannot open a polytechnic in India unless there is a functioning industry which is willing to associate with you within 30 kilometers radius of the place you're establishing the polytechnic. We're tired of students going to polytechnics, being taught out of date textbooks, by professors who haven't seen the inside of a contemporary workplace, and then unleashing students into the market who are really holding out-of-date skills, even if they're young people. So we said, let's really connect our polytechnics by law to functioning industries where students can have a relationship and see how the current 21st century workplace is functioning. And that sort of thing is very important. Similarly, at the more higher level, let's say at the university or advanced university levels, take the IITs, for instance, we need to institutionalize a culture where a private company can come to an IIT or another engineering institution, private or public, and say, look, here's some seed money. We have this idea. We don't have enough staff to research this. Can your postgraduate students or doctoral students, whatever, whoever you have who's qualified, spend some time researching this idea? And if you come up with a viable concept, we'll share the royalties with you. We'll bring it to commercial production and we'll own the product. That sort of collaboration between business and industry simply hasn't happened enough in India, and I think the NEP permits it to happen. I will say that I was very pleased and touched by one thing, and that is that when the somewhat alarming earlier draft came out in 2019, I went and saw Minister Nishank, Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank, and what had been built, what I had sought as a 20-minute appointment to share my concerns with him, went on for 2.5 hours because he was so interested in engaging with a critic of the government. And I welcome that kind of receptivity. I'm sure there's a lot more that we can find together in making things work. What are the things that don't work so well? Some of my concerns relate to the school levels. We are seeing some real worries, for example, about how the good things about the policy may be unaffordable at the school level. It's all very well for the Prime Minister to say, why can't you go to school and learn both music and mathematics? But the school then has to have two separate establishments, music teachers, a music room and music equipment, in addition to the usual mathematics teachers. And the problem there is, will that not raise their fees? And if it does raise their fees, will not this luxury of studying both music and mathematics only be available to the affluent? That's a question to which I don't have a satisfactory answer. The grouping of government schools is something else that troubles me. They said now that the RTE, I beg your pardon, has made certain requirements that every school must have toilets, washing facilities, playgrounds, all sorts of specific requirements of infrastructure are present. And many, many schools, including government schools, have not been able to meet all the requirements. The government has said you can group them so that you can go to a school within a certain distance from your school. If I'm not mistaken, there's also about 30 kilometers to enjoy facilities that are not available in your school. Well, that may work for some facilities. Maybe a swimming pool is a relatively rare thing. And if 6 schools together can have a shift system and share a swimming pool in the 7th school, that should be fine. But you can't say that you'll group schools together for toilets, for girls. We already know what kind of a problem we have in our country when girls, for example, of a particular age, need to go to a toilet obligatorily once a month. And if they don't have that kind of clean facility in their school, they'll go home and very often they'll never come back. It's been a major factor. The absence of girls' toilets has been a major factor in dropouts from our government schools. Again, we're not sure how well that's been planned by the government. And one of my concerns goes all the way down to the Anganwadi level, where they want to put more and more of an onus on providing basic alphabetization, basic literacy, imparting the early skills of language and mathematics in the infancy of children, including the Anganwadi stage. But Anganwadis are so grossly under-budgeted and under-resourced, they often don't have enough money to provide nutritious meals to children. They pay their volunteer workers in the Anganwadis a very trivial salary, 1,000 rupees in some states, 1,500 rupees elsewhere. You're not going to be able to get instruction, literacy training, mathematics, even simple addition and subtraction. You're not going to get that from such poorly paid volunteer teachers. So I really worry about how well relying on institutions that have not been brought about to work well can actually produce the results the government wants. I also fear that the overall target, for example, of allocating 6% of GDP to education has turned out to be completely unrealistic, because the government has not demonstrated a capacity to actually find those kinds of resources. Every year since the government has actually functioned in our country, since 2014, in other words, the education budget has come down, even during the couple of good years when the GDP went up. So that's not a good sign. And I think that to just throw targets in the air without a serious commitment in the national budget to providing the resources required means that the government may leave education under-financed. I will say that there has been broadly a tendency to centralize approaches in this government, and that has always worried me in a number of domains. I see some signs of that in the National Education Policy, and I hope the government will remember to back away from that, empower and fund the states in order to do better by their schools and colleges. Do not try and take everything on yourself. Our higher education system is already over-centralized, over-regulated, under-governed. We need to have much more liberal, flexible approaches. The NEP shows a willingness to consider that, but it must double down upon that. And finally, do not rely excessively on the private sector. I have nothing against the private sector. In fact, I think it's indispensable in the educational space for the private sector to be present, because the government cannot do everything itself. But always be conscious that there are too many children in our country who cannot afford a private sector education. Either make it mandatory by law that a certain percentage of seats in these schools must be given to the poor on scholarship basis, on the basis of merit scholarships, as well as scholarships reflecting backwardness and other socioeconomic factors, and also resource your government schools well enough so that the poor are not obliged to go to schools which they can't afford, where the optional extras are beyond their reach, and where therefore they cannot fully participate in the experiences those schools offer. Now, that's more than a brief outline of some of the major concerns I have with the NEP. I hope that all of you will have a very rich, rewarding, and detailed discussion in this conclave. And I once again congratulate Clymbe for having got people together to discuss the National Education Policy. Good luck to all of you. Have a wonderful conclave. Jai Hind.